To all the children of light, may you shine ever so brightly. How are we doing? I want to thank you for joining us. You're here with Sentinel Studios, and here we're working on some sketching, doing some studies of facial expressions. Today we're working on the specific expression of surprise, and I'm just working on some training I do through Watts Atelier. And what we're going to do is we're going to track through the Bible and see what we can learn through this image, see what lessons we can glean. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to read from the Dictionary of Biblical Imagery. It's an old classic. It's a big, thick book. You can find them, at used bookstores every now and then, but they're pretty pricey. But you can find it online. It's just the Dictionary of Biblical Imagery. I'm going to read through it and just kind of pick and choose and just kind of summarize my own words and then decide and cipher on where to slow down and what passages to zoom in on. Now let's go ahead and just jump right into it. Now we all know that surprise is a common ingredient of stories, and definitely life itself. You live long enough, you got good and bad surprises. It's definitely a literary convention that's been used throughout the ages. You think of it kind of as the great reversal. A lot of times, you see this in movies, definitely in old epics, old mythologies, and it's definitely throughout the Bible. Surprises often take the form of meetings. We see this with Adam and Eve, how they act surprised, when God on his daily normal stroll that he does through the garden after they sin, and then they act surprised. It's kind of funny. They ate the forbidden fruit. They realize they're naked. They are ashamed, but here comes God. And characters that encounter God, especially unexpectedly, that they are definitely surprised. These include Hagar, Jacob, Moses, Gideon, Samson's parents, Elijah, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Nebuchadnezzar, the two men from Emmaus. It just goes on and on. And then Jesus appears after his resurrection, and there was some surprise going on there. When we think of surprise, you want to think of astonishment, of wow, amazement. And it's one of the most fleeting emotions. It's very interesting is that, at first something happens suddenly, bam, and then you deal with the impact, and you either drift to sad, or you drift to happy, or it could be anger, it could be fear, but the surprise, the instant of surprise is very fleeting. And there are several categories of the surprise stories throughout Scripture. One of the categories is that things just turn out contrary than one may expect. There's all kinds of examples of these. That would be the firstborn Cain has given this great name, and Eve says, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. And then it turns out that he wasn't too helpful to his brother, right? Another obvious one is things happen contrary is Abraham. He's there ready to sacrifice his son. Can you imagine? And then in the thicket, there's a ram. You talk about surprise. As the angel declares, Abraham, Abraham, stop. A very dramatic one is Moses comes down from Mount Sinai with God's law written on 2 tablets, only to discover that the nation has resorted to idolatry. And I have the old image from Charlton Heston, comes down and it shows the big crowd, everyone dancing, acting a fool, and he holds the big stones above his head and throws them down. Talk about surprise. And then that's a good example there where the instance of surprise quickly flees, and then in that case, it turns to anger. And a very tragic and devastating one is, remember the story of the Levite, how surprising it must have been to find his concubine lying dead at the door, and the nation is shocked at the news. In Judges 19, the poor concubine is raped and ravished all night to the point of death, and here's the holy man, the Levite, the priest of the people, and he takes her, he chops her up into pieces, and he sends her out to the 12 tribes of Israel as a judgment against the nation that look, we are the holy set apart people of God. This stuff that the nations around you, the pagans, do, that's not our style. That's not how we act. We are God's holy people, and look at what you've done. Very tragic, but definitely surprising. And both Saul and Samson were both positively endowed by God, and you would think they'd be ranked among some of the most successful of God, but it turns out they have disappointing endings. And another category that we have is element of surprise that involves characters who are brought to a sudden awareness of something they've done in ignorance. The whole story of Judah and Tamar, the whole story to me is surprising. The daughter-in-law poses herself as a temple prostitute, tricks him into getting impregnated, and we don't need to get into all that, but that whole situation is interesting. And we shouldn't be, but people were surprised at the marvelous wonders of God as he worked throughout Scripture. When Moses led the people out of Egypt, and there was all these amazing miracles through the Red Sea, and the manna and the quail, and all these provisions throughout the wilderness. Little shepherd boy David throwing his slaying at the great Goliath. People were in uproar and surprised over that. But one interesting thing to remember is that surprise is a picture of God's provision in the world. It is, no matter what our situation, if we're down, if we're in the dark, if we're in need, if we're in lack, God comes through and he moves in your life. He will surprise us, and that's a beautiful thing. So surprise is a picture of the providence of God, and it's something to hold on to. Now, I want to just real quick tell you about, years and years ago, I was in my early 20s, my first nephew, he was getting his sea legs learning how to walk. And I had enough sense to look at him, and I said in my mind, I might have audibly said, that boy's about to fall and hit himself on that coffee table. Well, he took one or two steps real shaky, and he fell. And he hit the coffee table. Now, I had enough sense in my early 20s to look and to foresee what was going to happen to that kid. Now, God is not 22 years old, 23 years old, 24 years old. He's from everlasting to everlasting, and he's seen your life, and he's watched your daddy's life, your mama's life, their parents' life, and their dad and their mother and their dad, all the way back to Adam and Eve. So there's nothing that we can do, or there's nothing that will happen to us that will surprise God. Nothing will catch God off guard, and that is a treasure to keep in your pocket. That is a jewel to hold deep in your heart. That no matter where we are in life, no matter what the situation, God is not surprised. He's not surprised at the state of the world. He's not surprised at what's going on in our culture. He's not surprised of what the weather's doing. He knows everything at all times. And it's a very comforting fact. Now let's cruise into the New Testament for a moment, and let's notice that Jesus scattered throughout his stories, throughout his parables, throughout his teaching, is the great reversal. The last shall be first, the first shall be last. There is this great surprise throughout all his teaching. But I'm just going to pick one here. That's a beautiful story. Is the Good Samaritan. And all the people passing by, the ones that should stop to help, no one renders help. They all avoid it. And then the unsuspecting, the outsider, the Samaritan, is the one who tends aid to this stranger, to this traveler broken down and beat up on the side of the road. And the surprise that's really the kernel, the essence of the story, is what makes it so impactful. And we would like to encourage you to read Scripture anticipating surprise. It's hard when we've heard all these stories our whole lives and we've read them for so long that we miss the great surprise. We miss the surprise that Moses went through all this big journey and he didn't get to make it to the promised land. May this breathe new life into your Scripture reading, that you will see the great surprise in the story of God. We love you. Shine on, my friends. Shine on.